Okay, government students, it's Mr. Cannon here with another brief video for you to help you with the lesson on the preamble and the hallmarks of our Constitution. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. The first thing we want to talk about is what the actual preamble to the Constitution. So the preamble to the Constitution is actually the very beginning statement before we get into what the government will actually look like. In other words, why they end up writing the document. And so in the preamble, what they say is that we, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and ensure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. So the first thing we notice is that we have we the people. So this is making it very clear that the United States is going to be a type of democracy. Now we're a very specific type. We're not a direct democracy. We are a constitutional democratic republic. We have representatives that represent us, so we're not a direct democracy, and we're governed by a constitution as well. That's the first thing that makes it clear, though, is that we are a government of the people, that we, the people, are the ones that have created this document. So why did they create it? It's pretty clear. It says in order to form a more perfect union. So that lets us know that the union we had before this, under the Articles of Confederation, was very much imperfect. And so we can't be perfect, but we want to be a more perfect union, one that can actually last. Established justice, that makes it very clear. We know what established justice is. We have to have justice. We have to have laws. Ensure domestic tranquility. That means that we are try to make sure that we have a society that can function, where things can be peaceful. And without a set of laws, you can't have a peaceful society. Provide for the common defense. There are real things that we have to defend against, both interior and exterior. So within our own country, illegal acts, we have to have a defense for those. And then, of course, from other countries, we have to be able to provide for defense against invasions from other countries. Promote the general welfare. That's very clear. We want to have general good things happening, things that we need to be able to take care of. The government needs to get involved with to promote the general welfare of the people. And the last, to secure the blessings of liberty. In other words, to make sure that we continue to be a free country, both for ourselves and for the future. That's what posterity is, for the people that come after us. So that's why we are going to establish this Constitution according to the preamble. Now, once we make it clear why we are establishing a constitution, now we need to actually look at what are some of the hallmarks or some of the big important pieces of our constitution. What are some of the parts of it that make it unique and that make it work, actually? And so the first thing we need to talk about is this concept called separation of powers. So in our Constitution, what we do is we take power and we separate it into different branches of government. Now, all governments, even if you're a dictatorship, all governments have to do three things. They have to make laws, they have to enforce those laws, and they have to interpret those laws. In a dictatorship or an absolute monarchy, that's done by one person. It's done by the dictator, or in an absolute monarchy by the king or queen. And in that case, they make the law, they decide what the law means, and they enforce the law. And in those kind of situations, we didn't want to have that in America, because that's not the kind of government that promotes liberty. So instead of having the powers all concentrated in one person or even in one group of people, we decided to separate it. And we'll talk more about that in the next slide. Another hallmark of our Constitution is this thing called checks and balances. So once you separate power into different branches, then you have to make sure that each of those branches has an equal or a close to equal amount of power. If you separate power, but then it turns out that one of the branches has 90% of the power, have you really separated power? No, you've just said you separated it, when in actuality one group still has, or one person still has, all the power. So what checks and balances, the purpose of them is to make sure that each branch has certain powers or certain checks over the other branches. And in the end, if each branch has certain checks over the other branches, then the hope is that it will balance out the power. So that's what checks and balances are, and we'll talk more about that in a later lesson. Federalism is another hallmark of our Constitution. When we talk about federalism, what that means is that we divide power into different levels of government. So not only do we have different branches of government at the federal level, at the national level, but we also have lower levels of government. So not only do we have a federal government or a national government in Washington, D.C., but we also have state governments. We have 50 of them because there are 50 states. So federalism is dividing power into the federal government, the state governments, and then at an even lower level, we have what are called local governments. Here in South Carolina, I live in Lexington. So not only the town of Lexington, but the county of Lexington would be a local government that I have to obey their laws. And each of the levels, so at the top you have the federal government, then underneath you have the states, and then underneath that you have the local governments. Each of those levels has certain things that they can do that the other levels cannot do. And they also have things that they share with one another. Here's the worst one that they share, in my opinion, and that is taxes. The federal government can tax me, the state of South Carolina can tax me, and then my local government, Lexington County, can also tax me. And so that's what federalism is. It's dividing it into different levels. Now, we do know that this is not equal. It's not like separation of powers where each of the branches are equal. In federalism, there is a clear distinction where the federal government's at the top and then the states underneath, and then underneath that, the local governments. But there are some things that the local governments can do that the state and the federal government can't do, and vice versa. But ultimately, the federal government is the most powerful one of the three. Another hallmark of our Constitution is called habeas corpus. This is a Latin word. You don't need to know the word except to recognize that when you see it, it means the idea that we cannot just be thrown in jail without being charged with something. What habeas corpus allows is for a person who is arrested to go to court and demand to know why they are being arrested. The government actually has to provide proof that they should be arrested to begin with. This is even before a trial. We're not even talking about a trial with a jury. Ultimately, that is who will ultimately decide whether a person stays in jail or not. But to even be put in jail to begin with, there has to be some burden of proof. And so what you can, if you're put in jail, you can request as a habeas corpus, not request, it's just, that's something that's a part of our system, is that they have to give charges. They have to show what charges. So if the people that arrest you, whether it's the local government or the state government or the federal government, if they don't have any reason, they can't provide any evidence that you should be incarcerated, that you should be put in jail, then you would have a court hearing, habeas corpus would come into play, and you would be let go. Now, if they have certain evidence and the judge says, yeah, there's enough evidence here to hold this person, then you would ultimately have a trial, and then it would be the jury that would decide whether you go free or not. But habeas corpus is the idea that they can't just throw you in jail without any evidence at all. And the reason we have this as a part of our Constitution is because that has happened throughout history. That was even happening here when we were colonies of Great Britain. They would just arrest people and not really charge them with anything, and that's not legal in America. And then the last thing we need to talk about as a hallmark of our Constitution is the Bill of Rights. And the Bill of Rights are those 10 amendments, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, which it lists specific rights that we have as American citizens. Things like freedom of speech and freedom of religion, things like they can't just search or take your property without a warrant or probable cause. Things like that. Those are all part of the Bill of Rights, and we'll talk more about that as well in a future lesson. Now, the last thing I want to go over in this short video is the three branches of government. So what we actually set up as part of our federal government were divided power into three branches. The first branch is the legislative branch. That's the branch that they talk about in Article 1 of the Constitution. It is led by the Congress. The Congress is made up of two houses, the House of Representatives and the Senate. The House of Representatives is based on population, and the Senate is equal for every state. So that's why in the House of Representatives, California has 57 members. We in South Carolina have 7 because they're much bigger than us. But in the Senate, they have 2 senators and we have 2. So that's Congress, and their whole job is to make the law. What the legislative branch does is make the law. The executive branch is the branch led by the president. Now, this was the branch that the founders were most concerned about being too powerful. They were concerned because they put the hands into one person, and that the ultimate authority into one person, and that is the president. The president is the head of that executive branch. With Congress, there are 435 members of Congress, but there's only one president. So the president's job is to lead the executive branch, and the executive branch's job is to enforce the law. They don't get to make the law. They only enforce the law that is passed by the legislative branch. So the legislative branch makes the law, and then it's the executive branch's job to actually enforce that law. And then the last branch is the judicial branch, which is led by the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court's job, all the court's job, are to interpret the law. So the highest court is called the Supreme Court. We have courts underneath that, of course. But their job is to interpret, to read the law and determine what it means and if a person actually has violated the law or not. So those are our three branches of government, which we will talk way more in detail about in future lessons.